It's now to discuss the legalities of both the hearings in Chicago and Portland is attorney Karen Conti. Karen, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So interesting, there were two hearings at the same time today, one in Portland, the other in Chicago. This judge in Chicago is expected to announce her decision. Now, we were listening throughout the day. We had a reporter, Anita Blanton, in the courtroom, and a lot of the questioning made it seem like she was not convinced that this was the way to go, to have National Guard troops here. So if she grants the temporary restraining order against the National Guard, what comes next?
Well, the troops would have to leave, and I would imagine that there is going to be some disputes about that. I would imagine that the administration is going to immediately file an emergency appeal up to our appellate court, and there will be a quick hearing at that point in time. Will the troops have to go home? Will they be put up in a hotel? I don't know. This is obviously unprecedented, but I would expect at some point this case and all of these cases are going to go up to the U.S. Supreme Court for decision.
Karen, there has been, as you know, heated exchanges between ICE agents and protesters. We know that a man was shot reportedly after having dragged an ICE agent. A woman was shot and arrested after being part of an alleged blockade. The government made a case today that in the case of a rebellion or danger of a rebellion, the president is well within his rights to bring in the Guard. How difficult is this decision for the judge to determine whether or not, in fact, these ICE agents are truly in danger, if this, in fact, rises to the level of rebellion, or if these are, in fact, just isolated incidents?
Yeah, this is very complicated. It's an interplay of two laws that have been on the books for 130, 150 years. The Posse Comitatus Act basically says that the federal government cannot deploy federalized troops to enforce civil law, and that's it's a really good reason for it. The whole history of our country is based on the idea that you don't want the federal government telling the states what to do and interfering with how the states govern themselves. Then there's the Insurrection Act, and that is complicated because it's very vague, and it basically says, as you said, if there's a rebellion or an insurrection, then the federal government can go into the states to enforce the laws and to protect the citizens. However, what rises to the level of a rebellion is something that's never really been defined. And certainly if a governor or the legislator of Illinois would say, hey, come in, we want you to come in because there's a natural disaster or there's riots that we can't control, then that can happen. But when the governor and the legislator say, no, we don't want you in here, that's when we have this clash, and that's what this judge is going to rule on momentarily.
Okay, Karen, we just heard that, in fact, there is a ruling. The TRO has been granted. I want you to hear what was said during this. Anita Blanton is in the courtroom, and she's filling us in. And she said that the judge had said not even Alexander Hamilton could have envisioned one state militia to be used against another state's residents because the president wants to punish those with views other than his own, that this violates the 10th and 4th Amendment. Reaction to this?
I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all. I think that she did not find that there was a rebellion. She probably looked at this and said that, you know, the ICE agents being here and the protests going on are going to cause some controversy. But does that rise to the level of having the federal government come in and dictate what goes on? And again, this goes back to the founding fathers, where we want a very strong state government, and we want a very weak, in some ways, federal government. The federal government's rights under the 10th Amendment are very limited. They're limited to a post office, coining currency, declaring war, things like that. Whereas the states have the authority to control and dominate and pass laws as they see fit and basically enforce those laws. So this doesn't surprise me that whatever was happening with ICE and protests, that it did not rise to the level under the Insurrection Act.
Okay, let's talk about the mechanism of the court system now. So the TRO is in effect. How quickly would you imagine that the Trump administration will then respond? Will they appeal that? How soon would you imagine that might happen?
I would imagine they're already preparing an appeal that will be filed momentarily. It's probably already drafted. But a TRO is not the end of the game. The TRO is basically this judge saying, I think you're going to win on the merits, and I find this to be an emergency, so that I'm going to issue this order on an expedited basis. But there still needs to be a full-blown trial and hearing on the full issue, where the judge will then make a permanent decision. But as a practical matter, Scott, this decision is going to bar the National Guard. So hopefully, you know, if they are following this rule and this ruling, is going to bar them from doing anything else until further notice.
Okay. Apparently, she also said that she would have a oral ruling, an opinion that is issued tomorrow. And they went on to talk about the fact that the Broadview Center, which we've been covering with what's going on out there, is the center of this argument. And for 19 years. Small groups have continuously held peaceful protests there at that processing center, and that it only took a turn after the announcement of the increased enforcement, and that crowds have never exceeded 200. So she is looking at what's been going on at Broadview, and apparently felt like the case that these National Guard and ICE immigrants were put in danger did not feel that that was the case, that in fact maybe it was them that was inciting this, which is something both the governor and the mayor have said was going to happen.
Well, and certainly you can't create an insurrection by sending military in and then saying, well, I'm invoking the Insurrection Act. So yes, I think she's probably noting the causation here. What was the cause of the unrest? And does the unrest rise to the level of something that we as citizens are not having our constitutional rights, we're not being allowed our constitutional rights? Because that's what the law says. It says that it has to be so bad that we aren't able to live our lives here in Illinois, and that's certainly not the case from what I understand.
All right, Karen Conti, we always appreciate you joining us and breaking this down. And of course, we are still following this case. We have Anita over at the courthouse, so we'll be going live there in just a moment. But in the meantime, we'll be right back.